Number 9. Rana Plaza. On April 24, 2013, an 8-story commercial building known as Rana Plaza collapsed in the Dhaka district of Bangladesh. Home to several clothing factories, a bank, some shops and several apartments, the building had begun to show visible cracks the day before. Workers were evacuated and an inspector warned the owners against continuing to use the building. However, the owner stated on public television that the structure was safe and ordered employees to return to work the next day. Managers threatened to withhold 1 month's pay from any workers who refused to show up for their shift. The building collapsed that next day during the morning rush hour. A weeks-long rescue and recovery effort ensued, putting the death toll at 1,134, while around 2,500 injured survivors were pulled from the rubble. For many survivors, the wait for rescue was excruciating as they remained stranded by debris in the stifling heat, dehydrated and in pain. Some even resorted to drinking their own urine to survive. The casualty numbers earned the tragedy the distinction of being the deadliest garment factory disaster of all time, the most fatal industrial catastrophe in the history of Bangladesh, and the worst lethal, non-deliberate structural failure accident in modern human history. Only the building's ground floor was left intact following the collapse. An investigation found that Rana Plaza was built over a filled-in pond and likely lacked structural integrity from the very beginning. The building's conversion from commercial to industrial use was also blamed for the disaster, along with the addition of 3 floors beyond what was allowed under the original building permit. Builders also used poor quality construction materials, which most certainly contributed to the accident. In addition to the flawed construction that led to the collapse, many criticized the government of Bangladesh for turning down the United Nations offer to assist in the rescue. The organization had determined that the country lacked the resources necessary to carry out a proper rescue mission. However, officials rejected help out of what many believe was a face-saving desire to protect the national image. Number 8. Walkie Scorchy. A newly built skyscraper in London made news headlines in 2013 when its reflective qualities melted the side view mirrors and panels on a Jaguar parked nearby. Other vehicle owners soon began to report similar issues, accompanied by the smell of burning plastic. Around the same time, nearby business owners began complaining about their carpets catching fire and slate tiles shattering from the heat generated by the building. Nicknamed the walkie-talkie for its unusual shape, or the Walkie Scorchy depending on who you ask, the 38-story structure was built in the city's financial centre at 20 Fenchurch Street. Originally covered in reflective glass, its unique inward curving exterior generated more problems than visual appeal as it concentrated the sun's rays into small areas. This was a design flaw resulting from the structure's concave shape, according to physics researcher and lecturer James Keaveney, who spoke with City AM about the issue. He further explained that there are solar power stations throughout the world that are deliberately built in a similar fashion for the express purpose of generating energy. To solve the problem, workers covered the reflective parts of the 525-foot-tall, 160 meters walkie-talkie with shading to deflect the sun's rays. Luckily, this seems to have solved the problem. Number 7. Hyatt Regency Walkway. The Hyatt Regency Hotel in Kansas City, Missouri was built just a few years before 2 glass and concrete overhead walkways collapsed inside the building on July 17, 1981. The cascading platforms were filled with partygoers and overloaded with more weight than they had ever held before. 114 people died and 216 were injured in the tragedy, which deeply affected the city for years to come. Findings revealed that the hotel had been built amid a nationwide trend of fast-tracked construction projects. In other words, like many other structures that were appearing at the time, it was designed and built in a hurry and with inadequate oversight. Officials also blamed a miscommunication loop of corporate neglect and irresponsibility, and determined that the so-called ill-conceived walkways would have failed under just 1/3 of the weight they were holding the night they fell. The engineering company responsible for the failure was acquitted of criminal charges but found to be guilty of gross negligence, misconduct, and unprofessional conduct. The business lost its licenses in 4 states and its national affiliation. Its owner and main engineer, Jack D. Gillam, eventually took personal responsibility for the disaster and the design flaws leading up to it. He decided to make what little good he could out of the tragedy by becoming an engineering disaster lecturer and helped to prevent similar needless catastrophes from happening. The hotel reopened 3 months after the collapse, but the finger-pointing polarized opinions and the city's wide-scale preoccupation with the disaster persisted for years. This constant backlash often came at the emotional expense of victims who wanted to settle their lawsuits and move on. Number 6. Ponte Marandi. In August of 2018, a strong storm hit the city of Genoa in northwest Italy. Traffic slowed nearly to a stop as cars waited to drive across the Ponte Marandi, a bridge that connected neighboring districts across the Polsevera River and also functioned as part of a major highway connecting Italy and France. Built between 1963 and 1967, the Ponte Marandi stood as a testament to Italy's engineering legacy. However, that fateful summer day, a section of it collapsed, sending dozens of vehicles plummeting into the river and onto some railroad tracks and buildings below. 43 people died in the disaster, and at least 16 were injured. Even worse, around 600 people were left homeless following the incident. This occurrence marked Italy's 11th bridge collapse in 5 years, deepening already heightened concerns about the country's transport infrastructure. Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte declared a state of emergency in the Liguria region that lasted a year. During that time, authorities scrambled to determine what caused the collapse and who, if anyone, was responsible. The findings revealed that while there were no issues with the bridge's original construction, the companies tasked with maintaining the Ponte Marandi failed to live up to their obligations. In the summer of 2022, prosecutors brought charges against 59 employees who were accused of knowing that the bridge was at risk of collapsing. These defendants avoided carrying out the necessary work because they wanted to preserve the dividends of shareholders. Prosecutor Walter Cotugno described the Ponte Marandi as a ticking time bomb and noted that while nobody knew when it was going to collapse, it was clear based on the structure's condition that it was heading in that direction. This and other construction disasters throughout Italy in recent years has highlighted the need to invest more heavily in the country's infrastructure, which faced drastic budget cuts following the onset of the 2008 global recession. As some would say, you can't put a price on safety, and many are learning the hard way. The Ponte Marandi was demolished in 2019 and replaced by the Genoa St. George Bridge, which will hopefully receive the attention it needs to remain safe and stable. Number 5. Mick Ferris. During his shift as a London tour bus driver one day in 2018, 53-year-old Mick Ferris stopped to use the bathroom. He was on his way back to his vehicle when a window pane fell from a 27th floor penthouse and crushed him. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The tragedy happened just a week before Ferris was scheduled to go on vacation with his wife. Family members, friends, and colleagues alike were all devastated by the grandfather's death. The window pane fell 250 feet, 76.2 meters from the 27-story luxury apartment building, which had just been completed a year earlier. Shortly after the incident, both the authorities and the property developer announced that they were investigating the accident. The findings revealed that the same pane had fallen the year prior to Ferris's death. Luckily, nobody was hurt in the previous occurrence. Residents were told to keep their windows shut as the investigation continued. In the meantime, a spokesperson for the building's developer said that the situation underwent a full investigation after the first time the window fell. They promised that proper action was taken to secure it the second time. However, many were left to doubt these claims, believing that Ferris would likely still be alive if that were true. It's unclear whether authorities ever got to the bottom of what caused the window pane that killed Ferris to fall. Number 4. NYC crane collapse. During the construction of the Halcyon apartment building on Manhattan's East Side, the project's developer decided to deviate from the original plan. Instead of building the originally agreed-upon 40-story skyscraper, he planned to make it 44 stories tall. However, the building never even reached its original planned height due to a catastrophic accident that happened on March 15, 2008. Workers were attaching a new steel collar to their 200-foot, 61 meters crane in an effort to anchor it to the building's 18th floor when it collapsed and fell to the sidewalk below. This event killed 7 people and injured 24 others. New York City's mayor at the time, Michael Bloomberg, described the incident as the worst construction accident in the Big Apple's recent history. An Occupational Safety and Health Administration (OSHA) investigation found that employees had previously failed to follow the crane manufacturer's instructions for securing the machine to the 9th floor. It came out that they had only used half the recommended number of polyester slings, and they became overloaded and failed, causing the collar supporting them to drop. 2 lower collars became dislodged, leaving the crane with no lateral support, which allowed it to topple over. By then, the construction site had already received 13 citations for safety violations from the New York City Department of Buildings. Shockingly, just a week before the collapse, the local government's safety hotline had received a complaint about the crane, which by then had become structurally detached from the building. It was later found out that a Department of Buildings inspector filed false paperwork claiming he had inspected the site when no such inspection had taken place. Following the awful tragedy, construction eventually resumed on the Halcyon building, which ended up only being 32 stories tall upon its completion in 2015. Number 3. Willow Island disaster. During the late 1970s, the Allegheny Power System Company began building a newer, larger power plant at Willow Island in West Virginia. By April of 1978, one of 2 planned cooling towers was completed, and construction on the second tower was underway. It had reached a height of 166 feet, 51 meters, when workers began raising a bucket of concrete with a crane. Suddenly, the cable lifting the bucket went limp, and the crane pulling it fell inward toward the tower. The previous day's concrete began collapsing, and soon enough a mess of concrete, wood and metal fell into the tower's open center, including 51 workers whose scaffolding had collapsed from beneath them. The co-workers who weren't on the scaffolding immediately began digging for them, but unfortunately there were no survivors. To this day, the incident is regarded as one of the biggest construction accidents in US history. Investigators blamed numerous factors for the tragedy, but above all, the rushed pace at which the workers were building the tower seemed to hasten its collapse. Additionally, federal authorities determined that scaffolding was attached to concrete that hadn't fully dried, and some bolts were missing, while others were of insufficient grade. Additionally, the workers' escape was restricted by the presence of only one access ladder, and workers had modified an elaborate concrete hoisting system without proper engineering review. Altogether, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, cited the project's contractors for 20 violations, although no criminal charges were ever filed. Today, a memorial plaque sits at the property where the workers lost their lives. Number 2. Amanda Telfer. Amanda Telfer was a 43-year-old lawyer working in England when she was fatally struck by 3 concrete window frames in 2012. She was walking past a building in London's Hanover Square when the pieces of masonry fell on her. 2 women tried to save her life, but were unfortunately unsuccessful. Authorities announced shortly after the tragedy that an investigation into the circumstances and the cause of Telfer's death was underway. In the meantime, the site of the accident became a memorial. The women who tried to rescue Telfer left a card stating, "Sorry we couldn't save you." An investigation found that construction boss Kelvin Adset left the frames unsecured against a wall at the site, causing what a judge described as Telfer's wholly needless and untimely death. He was found guilty of manslaughter and breaching health and safety regulations. He was jailed for a year for the consequences of his thoughtless actions. The ambitious attorney is remembered for her years-long work as a consultant lawyer for the publishing giant Random House. She is also memorialized for her advocacy for death row prisoners and those locked up at Guantanamo Bay and other controversial prisons. Representing the non-profit Reprieve, spokesperson Stafford Smith described Telfer's death as tragic and praised her work for vulnerable individuals accused of serious crimes. Number 1. Hard Rock Hotel construction site. One of the worst construction disasters to ever take place in the history of New Orleans happened on October 12, 2019, when a hotel that was in the process of being built collapsed. This event killed 3 workers and injured several dozen more. It took months to recover the deceased employees' remains amidst all the rubble. An investigation determined that there were structural design flaws in the building, which was supposed to become a Hard Rock hotel. An investigation by local station Fox 8 found an Inspector General's report indicating some major violations. Prior to the disaster, the senior city building inspector may not have checked the property on up to 8 separate occasions, despite records indicating that an inspection was in fact performed. Criminal charges were recommended, but none were ever filed against the developers, engineers, or inspectors associated with the site. The deadly collapse led the city's authorities to impose new rules in hopes of preventing any similar disasters in the future. Under the new policies, architectural designs for buildings more than 75 feet, 23 meters tall, are subject to peer review, and construction sites are now inspected by an independent structural engineer. The building was deemed beyond saving and was finally demolished in January 2021, following months of public squabbling over what to do with it. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be forced to take a 30-minute detour on your drive to work every day due to a collapsed bridge, or be stuck living next door to a heaping pile of rubble after the building next to yours collapsed? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you next time for another awesome video. Bye.